In 2010, Dr. David Cagle, our senior minister, came to me and said, would you be interested in participating in preparing for the Centennial? And he said, it's in 2017. And I thought, my goodness, that's a long time out there, but sure, I'll be glad to help. And I thought, well, it'll involve maybe a big celebration, maybe a history room, because I knew that in the past a number of different historians in the church had been interested in that. So anyway, I met with some of the church historians and some church friends. We talked about different ideas, once again thinking 7 years until we have to pull this all together. And we formed a committee. We have Jane Harris and Margaret Cathcart that agreed to get together all of the things that they could find in the church related to our history. Then Jane Boyd agreed to write a church history. And then we thought, well, one of the most important things would be to go to some of our former members, our senior ministers from the past, our staff. You know, we felt like we had a wealth of information that would come from the individuals. So we thought, well, we'll just interview them. Then we decided the best way would be to do videos. And Don Thompson and Jenny Clemmer and Steve Cathcart have done well over 60 interviews. And they're just a wealth of information about our church, about the history of Kingsport. They're just wonderful. Finally, we asked Jeannie McClure if she would agree to handle the actual celebration, which isn't until March of this coming year, March 17th through 19th. The next thing I did was I went to a good friend, Myra Danahy, who has Danahy Design, and she graciously donated our logo. Now, with all these components in place, we were ready to roll. And so Jane Harris and Margaret Cathcart began the great search in our church for all the things that we wanted to include. So Jane Harris is going to tell you about that long process.
In 2010, DeeDee told you that was when we started this project here. I was sitting at the beach having a wonderful time, and I get this phone call from DeeDee Dietrich that says, would you work on getting together some of the things in the church that tell the church history? And I don't need it to be finished till 2017. I'd never accepted a 7-year volunteer job before, but I said, well, that's interesting. I'll do it if I can work with my friend that I'd been in this church with since junior high. So Margaret Wheeler Cathcart and I began looking all over this church for whatever we could find. 3 floors of a big church. We looked in a lot of places I'd never even been. And I've been a member here a long time. We started gathering things in a room upstairs. We had banker's boxes, one for each minister, and we thought that'd be plenty. Well, we soon outgrew that. People began giving us things. And people had lots of interesting things in their homes, and they would give them to us. And some of the past ministers gave us things. One of the past ministers' family had all of his records, and he had kept a list of every child he'd baptized, every sermon he'd preached, every funeral he had conducted, names of all his sermons. Very interesting, and we now have that here. We have a member grandson of one of the early ministers, and he gave us, we didn't get to keep them, but he did give us to look at all of the 3x5 cards that his granddad preached sermons from. So we have those on digitally. Have to give credit for this beautiful room to the ladies in our church who managed the fixtures, furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, and they made this room beautiful. Margaret Cathcart and I designed how we were going to store things, but they made it look really nice. Some of the things in the room that are of interest, this table that we're sitting around was in the Hufford House, which is where the charter members of the church met to organize the church. And we also have in here 2 of the chairs that were purchased in 1941, when our first major construction took place. They were the session chairs. They cost $6.50. And we still have a number of those here in the church. So we've tried to make this room not only look nice and hold the artifacts of the church, but we've wanted it to be useful. Our first goal was to have as much available for Jane Boyd and her researchers to develop the history. So they used a lot of the things we found as the documents to document our history. The room is still available and will be available for anybody who wants to come in and do some research. It's interesting sometimes the things you can find, even if your family was a part of this church. It's real interesting, very personal to you. But anyone who's interested in the history of Kingsport can find out a lot by looking at the things we've gathered. We also have the videotapes of the past members and staff members that Jenny Clemmer worked on.
Out of the interview and archival collections grew the idea of having individual programs. We had a wealth of material on each of our ministers' tenures. We've had 10 ministers. So we decided that we would have twice yearly programs from beginning in 2011 that would cover those periods of time. It was a great little mini reunion where different guest speakers came, people who knew the former ministers. If there were former staff members alive, they attended, and family members, especially of the ministers who have gone to their reward. Each of these included a meet and greet reception, a church-wide family dinner, and then a program with PowerPoint presentations, visual displays, and then speakers. These have proved to be very helpful in encouraging our way as we write our book and as we prepare for our actual celebration. Now, after collecting all this memorabilia and these personal interviews and doing these programs, Jane Boyd began the monumental task of researching and writing the history of our first 100 years.
The process has been a very collaborative one over these 5 to 7 years of working on it. Many people were asked to contribute small portions, take a chapter out of the book and be responsible for the research on that and submit notes and maybe even a complete write-up. We've also been aided by the fact that we had programs throughout several years, 2 a year, in which one focus was on the minister of of a particular era. So this has been very helpful in moving us along at a very steady pace toward the completion of the book, assembling the materials, writing that part, putting the pictures together, making a complete thing. So we felt one part of it was finished when we got past that program. Then it became important to put the whole thing together. We were also very fortunate in doing our research at a time when we still had many people who actually lived and knew each minister. Margaret Austin Smith, well into her 90s, knows every minister from Dr. Robert King, who was our first one who came in 1917. She was a small child. She was born in Kingsport, and so from her on up, we have somebody who has known every minister. Also, we've been able to use the family members. The internet has been very helpful in this because with the Presbyterian records of ministers, you go plug in a name and up comes where he is now and maybe even an email address, a telephone number, and immediately you've got contact. So we built on the research done by Mary Harvey for the 75th anniversary. She did research for the 52 members who were the founding members on that Sunday afternoon, March 18th, 1917. And then we augmented that with research and pictures on each one of them. Unfortunately, we couldn't find all 52, but we found a number of them. The other thing that's important about the history room is that Jane Harris has digitized so much of the record, and that it's in the current technology, particularly pictures and other documents that we can access from other places. So this means that our history is in the current format, which I think is unusual. At the very beginning, our little congregation was meeting in the movie theater and in tents for summertime worship until they were allocated the little white schoolhouse, which sits on this wedge of Church Circle. For $1, the Kingsport Improvement Company gave the land and the little building. The church congregation renovated the interior to make it serve for from 1917 to 1941. They didn't have their own, they didn't build a building for themselves, but within the very first years, they bought a building for a small congregation in the Gibsontown area. And on Sunday afternoons, the leadership of the congregation here would be going down to Gibsontown, conducting Sunday school, inviting those children to Bible school, leading worship there. So from the very beginning, it has been an outreach congregation, and out of that has come a number of church plantings or church chapels that became churches. And in the book there is a beautiful map of where these churches are located, as well as the first buildings and then the subsequent buildings. Another significant thing for our community that this church has pioneered was in race relations. In the earliest days of the 1930s, there was an effort to provide, and a successful effort in providing a nursery school for the black community. Before this, the younger black children would be at home, and an older child might have to stay at home to care for the younger siblings while the mother and the father worked. And this made it possible for the older children to be in regular school and the younger children to be beautifully cared for. The other significant thing in race relations is that St. James Presbyterian Church had lost members, declined in such a way that it could no longer continue. Kirk Allen was our pastor at the time. He went to each of those families at St. James and invited them to come to First Presbyterian. It was a difficult decision for them, as Leola Campbell has so beautifully recounted at the on other occasions. And the significant moment is captured in our book, written for a Presbyterian magazine at the time, of the Sunday when Carla Campbell Karst was baptized in our congregation, which was well before any real integration was taking place in the South. Our congregation has also been very active in cultural things through our music program. One of the wonderful things we did was the madrigal dinners, which were held over several nights. Beautiful costumes, gorgeous music, and exceptional food, all of this done by the membership. And then there have been also programs, music programs, and lecture programs, which are our gift to the wider community. These music programs were often on Sunday afternoons, using our wonderful music facilities, particularly an organ that was completely installed during that time. One of the things that I should mention also about our community ministry is our involvement with Habitat for Humanity. It was started essentially by one of our members, Elizabeth Ann Hay, who had visited in southeast Georgia, where Habitat was situated, and she brought back the idea and fostered that whole concept. We were an early church in building Habitat houses, and we were spurred into that by Danny Massey, who was our pastor at the time, and who told us his personal story. And this is recounted in our book, where he told us how important decent, affordable housing is to a family. Immediately, we subscribed the amount needed to build a house, and we put our labor and effort into it. And from that, we have built more than 12 houses during these intervening years. We have a strong sense of civic responsibility, and have, from those earliest days, have been promoting Kingsport as a community, as a business opportunity, as a worshiping opportunity. And we have attempted to be the hands and feet of Christ in the community where we are serving.
Our First Century Centennial book is on sale in the First Presbyterian Church office here at the church, or you can access an order form on our website at firstpreskingsport.org.